I didn't see it up there. Okay, here we go. Okay, welcome everybody to our session, Misperceptions, Misconceptions, and Missed Opportunities. Today, I will be the host, and we have three interesting, unique universities, selective universities that are going to talk a little bit about the application process with the focus on sometimes the mistakes that people can make in the assumptions they make when they apply to university. So my name is Raphael Katz. I'm a college counselor at Shanghai Qibao Dwight High School. And we have Panatha Ott from Brown and Frederick Osborne from Emerson and John E. from Yale University. They'll introduce themselves a little bit more as we get into the session. The overview, so I'll do a quick introduction, and my introduction is going to talk a little bit about from the student perspective, particularly the international student perspective. I'm in Shanghai, so I know the Chinese students the best. Some reasons why they might get off track or misperceive the application process to universities in the US. And then Brown, Emerson, and Yale will be sharing some case studies to give some examples of students that were successful or perhaps not successful. And then with the time remaining, we'll do a little panel discussion. And hopefully people can enjoy our presentation and feel free to make some comments at the end too. So how do students get off track in the application process? So I just brainstormed a bit myself from what I've seen with students and came up with a few notes that I'll share that are certainly open for discussion. So being in China, one thing that sometimes we have to remember is that in systems like China, where the university application process is an exam, China, Korea, Japan are all like this, students don't have a choice of college. They are assigned to a college based on one exam score. So in some ways, it's very fair and clear. If you can get a high score, the higher the score, the better the college. And that also gives you a little insight into why ranking is so important, because in China, universities are ranked, and you get the higher ranked university when you get the higher score. So I think that's the perspective that a lot of students and parents bring to the application process in China, but also countries outside of China. Quite a few countries have a university entrance exam, a high stakes exam. And so I think that's something that's good to keep in mind when you're trying to explain the US system to students who are used to that system. Another thing I would say is that, well, when a foreign student applies to the US, they're trying to get into a university in the US, it's really on the student to understand and want to be part of the value system that is run in that university. But having said that, I think a lot of universities can look very similar. So if you come from a country with a different value system, and then you hear different US universities talk about what's important and what they value, from an outside perspective especially, it can all sound very similar. So as universities are defining themselves and talking about their mission and things that that are important to them, it doesn't necessarily distinguish universities as much as you would think, certainly to Chinese students, or probably students from other countries too that have different sets of values. Another thought I had was that the rank of universities, we already mentioned that the rank can be really important in countries where the government actually does rank universities. So sometimes students and parents will take the ranking systems as more authoritative than they are. But there's also countries, when I worked with Korean students, a lot of them said, if you don't get into a certain ranked university, you don't get a career. And so I think that feeling is particularly strong maybe for some international students, that ranking equals your career opportunities in the future. And I think we all know that that's not necessarily true. There's not always a correlation between how famous or highly ranked a university is and what career options or how much money you make in the future. And then 2 more points before we get to our first panelist. Well, I wanted to say something of a college like Emerson in particular. You could say all liberal arts colleges, but I think the liberal arts colleges are starting to become more well-known and appreciated in East Asia and in China. But then you have a college like Emerson, which is has a particular specialty. And so there's no similar college in China or that our students are familiar with that they can compare it to. So that can also add to maybe even more of a challenge for certain specialty universities with special programs to be understood when they're in the international arena looking for international students. And then the final challenge, which we might, or the final question I put out there, which we might come to a little bit later, is the word fit. And so a lot of people say fit. I've heard people say fit is everything. But then you also have evidence like students who get into all the Ivy Leagues and they make it into the media. And so if you have this counter argument, I guess, sometimes in the media of, well, if certain colleges are looking for a certain kind of student, then how can one student get into all these top colleges? And I would even say in our own school, we've had students that have gotten into fairly different colleges. And so it does kind of bring up the question, which I pose here, a bit of a challenge maybe, is are all the colleges looking for the same student in the end? These good qualities we're looking for in a student, are really most colleges interested in those good qualities and looking for the same student? And this is something that our university admissions people can speak to a little bit if they get a chance. All right, so those are just some questions to think about and providing a little bit of perspective of my work with students, why they sometimes might get off or misconceive what's going to get them into a college. So why don't we go ahead and look at some case studies, and we're starting with Panatha.
That's right. Yeah. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening. Oh, I guess you're going to be seeing this in the afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here. I wish we were in person because we would be giving you the cases to discuss. This is the best we can do in the circumstances, so we'll try to make this interesting. So the first question to consider in thinking about cases is, does the student need to be perfect to get into a highly selective school? And I think Rafi introduced that very, very well, that perfect and great scores do not necessarily equal admission. You all know that. We're preaching to the choir, but sometimes it surprises everybody because we tend to forget that our school, particularly if it's a well-known and good one, is not the only school in the world. And what if the student does seem perfect and a good fit and isn't admitted? Then what? We worry about this. It's kind of funny. We sit there around the table at Brown and we think, oh no, we've ruined this child's life. And that person may have gotten into a slew of other highly selective schools. But we worry about this question too. I know you think we don't, but it's important to us. Is this the first time the student has encountered failure? And I'm sure those of you who are counselors see this all the time. Somebody who is a good student and has done everything right might be encountering failure for the very first time. It's the first time that he or she hasn't achieved what he or she has thought. The parents don't understand it, and it is a point in your life when you come to a realization, maybe you come to a realization that it's a big world and there are a lot of good students. Will the student be admitted somewhere? I think the answer to that is generally yes. It might not be the institution they thought. As Rafi said about the Korean student, there is this pecking order. If you don't get into these 8 universities, then your life is over. But we need to get beyond that. You all know this. Who defines fit anyway? Now, fit is a very, very slippery term, because we talk about it a lot, and surely we do mean it. It doesn't help us if the student comes and is unhappy because it was the wrong kind of place. But the thing that we don't discuss is understanding what a university's agenda is. And sometimes when we say fit, we mean it fits our needs. And so if a student has a certain talent, that student might get in because of that talent, when somebody who is on paper a little bit stronger is passed over. Those are all important. Now, I want to, before we go on to the case studies, go back to a couple of points that Rafi made. We absolutely see that students often do not understand the concept of fit. I just happened to see an exchange on Messenger that some thoughtful student sent me, where they were having a discussion about one of the correspondents going to Brown and being surprised that Brown wasn't in New York, and finding out that Rhode Island was actually a state. Now, I'm very used to people thinking Rhode Island is an island. Even in the United States, once I was in California and a cop was about to give me a ticket for flipping a U-turn in the wrong place. And when he saw my driver's license and saw that I was from some island someplace, he just figured I didn't really know how to drive, and I didn't get a ticket. So I can't really expect somebody on the other side of the planet to know where Rhode Island is and that it's not an island, when people in the United States, officials in the United States, don't know where it is. But what this student thought was that it was something like Long Island, and therefore in New York, and was very surprised. And I thought to myself, this student is coming here not knowing a basic fact, and that is, where's Brown? So we keep in mind that often there is this list and people are in love because they know Brown is near the top of that list. The other point is, as wonderful as the Common App is, those of you who have been around long enough to remember the time when we had our own applications, there was a lot more definition going on when we had our own sets of questions outside of the member pages, and people figured out fit a little bit more easily. Now that there's a common application where you write to just everybody, the student can become more confused. So lots of reasons for this to happen. Let's, if we could continue to the first case so we can discuss our students. So the first case is Abe, who goes to the International Community School. Now, all of these names have been changed, and some of the factoids have as well, but this is typical. So this is a child from a young man from Central Asia who speaks 4 languages, or has studied 4 languages, at least 2 or 3 of them fluently, who has honors courses in a national curriculum in just about every subject, and obviously quite advanced mathematics. So there are all of the basic courses that go into the liberal arts, in the social sciences, in languages, foreign languages. Advanced math, is valued above all in a lot of countries. Informatics, linear algebra, advanced physics. We only see the current courses. You can be sure in this national curriculum, biology and chemistry are there as well. We would look for that in the US curriculum. We sometimes don't have to look in a national curriculum. It will be there. Activities have to do with his intended area of study, app development, an internship. In addition, he was a programming club president, so there's leadership. He plays the guitar and has done so for 12 years. He's in sports. He takes what he's interested in and offers to the community by tutoring. So everything is fine. He's the valedictorian. The TOEFL is a little bit on borderline. The math is sky high. The verbal for Brown is a little bit lower. We may see this often in international students, but sometimes that in itself is a factor that we're going to take into account if other people have a higher score. So what happens to Abe? Could we have the next slide? Oh, I'm sorry. So before, I'm sorry, let's go back. I didn't put more in because I was going to read to you. Okay, I'm going to read the council recommendation. I did not put this on the screen for privacy reasons. So Abe is a current senior at the International Community School, which is known as one of the best schools in Central Asia. Students seeking admission receive top scores on the entrance exam in order to be selected for enrollment. The students maintain a highly rigorous course load, taking 12 or 13 honors level courses per year, and they earn both the local and the international diplomas. It's highly competitive. Everyone loves Abe. This must be due to his curious and energetic nature. There are some very rare special individuals who seem to invigorate and lift up those around them. Abe is one of these people and shares his excitement for learning and fervor freely. I have yet to have had a conversation with Abe without walking away feeling better about the world and more positive. Things weren't always so easy as Abe initially struggled upon arriving at our school. He had attended a small school taught extensively in Turkmen, so his English skills weren't as strong as those of his classmates. He initially struggled with his schoolwork, which was especially trying since he had been such a successful student at his former school. At first, he did not quite know how to ask for help, but once he mustered the courage to ask his English teacher for ways to improve, his progress really accelerated. You will see evidence of his growth in his transcript and his rise to leadership positions. Abe's positive spirit carries over into his community interests, which are varied and demonstrate his individuality. From performing as a guitarist to being the only student to take on new challenges like unicycling or building his own garden, to tinkering away at the workshop at school, he pursues what interests him, whether it's cool or not. Abe creates opportunities for himself and spreads positivity wherever he goes. He values self-expression, self-reflection, and the application of his skills. And the teacher recommendations were written with the same enthusiasm and excitement. So what happens here? There are two sticking points. One is Abe's interest in computer science is a really common one. There are a lot of people applying with this. And he's quite good. He has done things that nobody else in his country has done. But the other sticking point is the TOEFL is adequate, but it's borderline, and there's a question. So what happens? In a committee discussion, usually if we see the progress about which the counselor is speaking in English, the TOEFL, we become confident that English is going to continue improving because the trajectory has been very high and he has done very well. Had he been in an English curriculum all his life and had 100 TOEFL, we may have been a little bit more concerned, although that in itself would not keep him out because that is our published minimum. The computer science, we would have to be convinced that he was in fact one of our best. And the activities that he has do not indicate to us that he is advanced as some others. Still, he is from an unusual part of the world, so the discussion comes up for committee. This is a discussion that's going to take place if we have a lot of people from this area. He might be at a disadvantage. If we don't, it might be what pulls him in. I think there's some realization that coming from an unusual area is part of what creates diversity on campus. It is not, but when people expect that the factor that will get him in is computer science because he has linear algebra and informatics and has done so much, when that is the factor that people expect is going to be the turning point, it might be a surprise to find out that Abe gets in for other reasons, namely that he has an unusual background, which is part of it. Had he come from a country, let's say, well, let's say some of the Balkan countries have a lot of schools that zero in on computer science, so that you have a lot of people who are quite good at it. He might not look as compelling. So the very factor that he might think is nothing might be the factor that in fact is what we attach to. If we can move to the next case, Mira, the case of Mira. So Mira is at the International School of the Himalayas. If we could go to the next slide, of course, I don't know if, by the way, if these schools actually exist, it's pure coincidence because I made it up. I did not make up a lot of the factors here. These are taken from actual cases, but obviously we disguised every factor and just tried to make it very similar. So Mira, we find with a lot of our international students, they know 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 languages, as opposed to their American counterparts who sometimes don't even know English. And it's very, very impressive. So Mira knows Italian, Hindi, English, Spanish, and German. She's in an IB curriculum where she has global politics, economics, and biology at the higher level, and Spanish, English, and math at the standard level. Her activities include squash, environmental club. She's very much into this. She writes about this being her most important activity. She volunteers to share her passion with the environment. She's also an MUN, which goes with her stated interest of international studies and economics. She works with special needs students. She's a group president for fundraising for local communities affected by the earthquake. She's in the Himalayas, and she's very taken by everything that's happened in Nepal and the continued poverty. She has done really well. She has a very high TOEFL. We usually don't make a lot of distinction, by the way, with gradations in TOEFL. I have had students say that they have a 118 and now they're going to try to get a 120. That's going to make absolutely no difference. Still, it's very impressive that she's done well, and she has also done well in her verbal and her math, and she's predicted a 45 IB. Now, back to Rafi's point, this kind of student seems like a shoo-in. Could we go to the next slide, please? Now I know we have a next slide. All right, if you could all take a moment to read this, I won't read it to you, but if you could take a moment to read what she said about her interests in international relations and economics, and see what you think. Now, this is taken, I put together a few sentences from this place and that place. I was still worried that somebody might be able to recognize this. And John said something to me. He said, oh, this looks pretty generic. And I thought that gives things away. So I didn't, by the way, mention the writing samples. Both these kids wrote very nice essays. One was Mira's was on the environment, and Abe's was on a very, very well put together essay on computer science. So both of them talked about subjects about which they were passionate. And by the way, when an application comes together like this, the interests, the activities buttressing that, but also outside interests, it turns heads no matter what the end result is. So here is what happens with Mira. Mira looks like a lot of other people. Everybody wants to do economics, particularly if they're applying from abroad, and everybody wants IR, and everybody has done MUN, and everybody has achieved something, some leadership role, at least in applications to Brown. It's important to remember, you all, if your counselors have advised your kids so well, that when we see applicants, they are viable applicants. Okay, there are a few who should not have applied, but for the most part, they're viable applicants. So when we see a nearly perfect IB score and nearly perfect SATs, we have to ask ourselves, does everybody who's applying for this region look like this? And what the student and even the school thinks is the perfect candidate matches with Brown's interest in the refugee crisis and in the Watson Institute in International Relations, it will turn heads. It's going to be a stopper. It's going to be something that we discuss in committee. But at the end of the day, Mira might not make it because she's going to look a lot like other people. We're going to look at whether the International School of the Himalayas predictions are usually on target, because a perfect 45 is rare. And even though we see them a lot in the Ivies, we want to make sure that when a school says something, there is evidence to back up that a student is going to be at least close to that. So it might be surprising. I think Mira did get in, but she could have, in any given year, she might not have gotten in. It might be surprising to a school that this happened because she seems like a perfect fit. I will agree, she is a perfect fit. But in a group of applications and applicants where you get a generic statement, as I put this together, I found myself taking out Brown and being able to put Yale or Emerson or any other college in, and it all made sense. We have similar activities and the opportunity to study similar subjects. So what has to be convincing is that the student has thought about Brown, possibly knows where it is, maybe not, but has thought about Brown, knows what Brown has to offer, and has convinced us that this is the right fit. And that is the piece here that's missing and might make us pause. We do, of course, take into account that students, like that first one that I talked about, thinks that Rhode Island is another island next to Long Island. We do take that into account, that not everybody knows exactly what this is all about, but they should know some basics. They should know about our open curriculum. They should know whether what they want to do fits in well with the philosophical, educational philosophy that we have to offer. So those are the case studies that I am presenting, and I hope that you have questions. I know that we're not going to have an in-person, we're going to have a discussion at the end, but it won't be in person. You are welcome to send me emails if there are questions, panatha_ott@brown.edu. Thank you.
Thank you, Panatha. Those were very interesting case studies. Maybe we can come back to them a little bit at the end, but now we're going to go on to Frederick Osborne, who's going to give us a case study for Emerson.
Hi, everyone. As Raphael said, my name is Frederick. I am an Associate Director of Admission at Emerson College, and I work with students in Asia, Canada, Europe, and Mexico. For my presentation, I wanted to actually kind of take a different route because we are a somewhat of a less selective institution than my peer universities with me in this presentation, and talk a little bit about missed opportunities for gaining admission to Emerson College and other universities where the admission or acceptance rate, it has a discrepancy based on the program that you're applying to, because I see this happening a lot as a real missed opportunity for students. So we're actually going to look at two different applicants. Again, these are fictitious applicants with some real traits or something like that that we see all the time kind of pulled into them, as well as real schools as well. So again, the biggest misconception I see is that students are applying to the wrong program. This really can be a missed opportunity because our acceptance rate for our programs range from actually 64% to 6%. Our overall acceptance rate for the past 3 years, I'd say, is an average of around 35. But the program that you choose truly has the power to alter your path throughout the application process. So we'll look at two students, Lynn, Ron, and Seth, and we'll look about how their major choices affected them in the application process. And I'll also cover other opportunities of these students that they had to kind of enhance their profile outside of their major choice. So Raphael, if you want to click into Lynn Ron's application. So as we can see, Linron is clearly a strong student with a strong academic curriculum. She is doing the full IB, and that's something that we consider one of the most challenging curricula globally. We can also see that she's a strong English speaker with a great SAT score. Her interests and activities are showing is very Emerson related, which is something that we always look for as well. So because we're such a specific school and because students apply specifically to the program that they're interested in, we always try to connect that to what she's, doing outside of the classroom. So she's a member of the film club. She is a prefect. She interned at a local news station and is a leader of the student union. But as you can see, she applied as an undeclared student. So that means that she's coming in as having no major and then will be required to select a major once she's admitted and decides to attend Emerson. She also has yet to come to a webinar, college fair, or to campus. So that demonstrated interest is something that we do track, and she's not showing that as well. Her writing was solid, and she, like all students, had to complete a major essay where students talk about the major that they have selected. Linron wrote generally about her love of the arts and didn't actually get into a specific program that she may be interested in as well. Her writing was strong overall too. So all things to keep in mind. And if you want to click over to Sean, we can talk a little bit about that as well. So Sean is a student from Zurich International School. Obviously, again, this is not a real student, but is a real institution. Can you click to his next slide as well? So Sean is a little bit weaker academically with a college prep curriculum. So as you can see, he's taking courses in his senior year like Algebra 1, Applied Design, English 12, German 2, and a learning support course as well. You can also see that this student is not taking any honors courses, AP, even though his school offers the full IB curriculum as well. Sean is very involved, which is something that's really important to point out. So he is an actor in school plays. He's in the student council. He interned for a digital marketing firm over the summer. He did track and field and a school service trip to Ghana. So we do have some really good involvement there as well. Nothing, again, connected directly to the program that he's interested in, but all things of note and all things very Emerson related. And he makes it very clear in his written piece that he's interested in sports, interested in marketing, and he's labeled out specific courses that he would be interested in taking in his major essay. This is something that's very, very important to take note of as well, because I think our students can really benefit from really kind of pointing out what they're interested in and how they feel like Emerson is going to be kind of a path or a stepping stone on their path to success. Academically, he's at a 2.83, which is definitely a little bit lower for our scale. And he is a test optional applicant as well. So we gave him a 3, which basically means that he's solid academically, but not necessarily, at the tippy top would be number 1 for the rating of the test optional piece, which is an essay. 5 would be the lowest as well. And he had a specific essay in his test optional piece about, again, his interest in sports marketing and where Emerson kind of fits into that puzzle. So he's kind of reiterating this point of being interested in sports marketing and being interested in sports communication generally throughout the application. And I think that that definitely served him very, very well overall. So if we want to look at the decisions for those 2 students on the next slide. So final decisions and reasoning. Linron was offered a spot on the wait list and eventually offered spring admission. We do have a spring class that comes in January that we offer spots for, and Sean was actually admitted even though he was the academically weaker student. This is very, very important to take note of because I think that this is something that a lot of our students, families, and guidance counselors kind of get confused by, and it is because of those acceptance rates and how much they vary. So as you can see, outside of just the application itself, we're taking into account major choice, program interest, demonstrated interest, all that sort of stuff. And as you can see from the bottom, our acceptance rates were 6% for undecided and 45.3% for sports communication, and not this previously ended cycle, but the cycle before that. We don't have that data, fortunately, yet, given where we are in the admission cycle overall. So there are a couple things that we can kind of take from this, and a couple things that I really always like to point out to guidance counselors, because I think that it's really important for them to kind of have this information. If a student is at all interested in a major that that Emerson has to offer, I highly, highly suggest that they apply to it, because our undecided program is so selective. And I think that what a lot of students run into as well is they get very allured by Emerson, what Emerson is known for and what Emerson is ranked in. And those tend to be our film program and our performing arts programs. And we're ranked very high in both of those areas. So I think students who are coming from abroad are initially attracted to them, even though they may not be of specific interest to the student, or is highly interested in a way that they would actually want to make an entire career out of it. So my suggestion would always be to get connected with your admission counselor and be able to kind of find out what is the best fit for you. Because, you know, I always hate to see a student like Lynn Ron, who had some clear interests in Emerson related areas, but kind of, you know, for lack of a better term, you know, kind of misguided herself in the process by applying to our most selective major. Our theater programs are a really great instance of this as well. So our students who apply to musical theater, theater and performance, that sort of stuff, again, are very, very selective theater programs. They miss out on being at Emerson, even if they're not as interested in theater, because they applied to it because they heard it was a good program and they wanted to be at Emerson. So you really should let the major itself and your interest in that major really dictate you know, what your application is and where you end up applying and all that sort of stuff in terms of Emerson and other schools like Emerson, because it'll give you the opportunity to really kind of be in the environment and be in the learning environment that you want to be in, and be in possibly one of our communication programs or another liberal arts program like that. So it's all really important things to think about. And I think that, you know, I think connecting with us and making sure that you are utilizing everything that our office has to offer in terms of the guidance that we can provide is going to be really, really helpful, because I think it can be the difference between, as you have seen now, you know, getting into Emerson or getting into a school like Emerson, or kind of being denied or being kind of sent over to our wait list. So that was kind of a little bit about, you know, the process at Emerson and some missed opportunities. And I would be more than happy to kind of answer any questions, you know, after John speaks. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Frederick. So I'll have to admit my my idea for this topic actually came back in the days when university AOs could travel around the world and visit. John was in Shanghai and he gave a little talk, and that kind of inspired me to put together, see if anyone wanted to do this session at the IACAC conference about misperceptions about universities and missed opportunities. So we'll go ahead and hand the PPT over to John, and he has a case study about Taylor.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Raf, and thank you, Panitha and Rick, for those cases. And thinking about the title of this presentation, you know, misperceptions, misconceptions, and missed opportunities. You know, I think all of those M words, so to speak, are kind of rooted in the fact that sometimes there's a misunderstanding from students and from counselors about what it is that this process is about. And specifically with Panitha's cases from Brown, you know, there's a misperception about why students are and aren't admitted. And then with Rick's cases from Emerson, I think there's a really strong theme of just missed opportunities, you know, thinking that you needed to package yourself or submit an application in one way, when really the missed opportunity was just being yourself the entire time, right? So the case that I have to share from Yale kind of focuses on the second word, misconception. And the misconception that hopefully we can explore is this idea that the college admission process at any selective school is this kind of checklist of things that need to be handled or delivered on. And if you as a student have maximized on each of these items, you kind of hand it in like a golden ticket. And then Rick, Panitha, or I kind of say, yep, you met all the criteria, and then we offer you admission to our schools. And that is 100% a huge misconception, because if that were how the process worked, not only would we not have jobs, this would be such a boring and not gratifying part of our work. All of us love reading your students' applications, specifically because there is this intellectual quality to it, right? We're inherently curious about the motivations and the perspectives of hardworking young people from all different contexts. And specifically for this conference, the international aspect of that, the fact that these students are coming from schools and communities from all around the world is what makes our job so fun. So by exploring Taylor's case, hopefully you can get a stronger sense of how we engage in that. So if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. Cool. So Taylor goes to went to an international school in Hong Kong. She's an international applicant in that she is a foreign passport holder. Like some of the cases that we heard from before, Taylor was enrolled in a full IB diploma. She was taking higher level economics, Chinese and film, and standard level English literature, physics, and mathematics. Her composite ACT score was a 32. Her predicted IB score was a 43, right? So kind of just taking that first set of descriptions, this is a classic example of a student for whom, if they listen to all of the negative energy surrounding college admissions, and particularly selective liberal arts admissions, one might believe, oh, like a 32 ACT is not perfect. An IB score of 43 is not perfect. It's very strong, but it's not perfect, like the case that we saw from Panitha. And then sometimes people engage in this really unhealthy dialogue where they look at the choices of higher levels and they think to themselves, oh, economics, Chinese, and film. Is film like really a rigorous higher level? Wouldn't it have been more impressive if the student took, you know, maybe more perceived rigorous classes at the higher level, right? And even at this stage of the application process, this is kind of the misconception that a lot of students and families and schools can have, where schools like ours are looking specifically to see a 36 ACT, a 45 IB predict, and a certain set of higher levels or standard levels, right? And the way we evaluate these applications is thankfully not in this way where we're just making sure that each criteria is exceeded or met. Rather, we take in all this information in hopes of kind of understanding who the student is, right? So in the process of reading Taylor's application, we read through her writing, which is very strong, that she's really interested in film studies from kind of a gender equality and feminist angle. She showcased her liberal creative upbringing, and for one of her writing pieces, she wrote an essay on bringing holiday cheer to the school community via her membership in student council, right? Her activities were solid, but they were not in no way singular or extraordinary in the way that some people might expect. She did some film-related community service. She was involved in Model United Nations at her school. She was the head editor of an arts magazine, a member of the student council, a member of the debate team, and played badminton in her spare time, right? So one of the reasons I love discussing Taylor is no part of her application was inherently so overwhelmingly unique or special that the committee felt like we had to admit her, right? But she was ultimately admitted, and the reason why she was such a compelling case for us was because the narrative of who she was as a student and a community member all really came together. Even though on the surface, someone with a 32 ACT might not present the most overwhelming academic credentials. If we could go to the next slide, Raph, that would be great. So one of the questions on our application prompts our students that are applying to reflect on why they're interested in certain areas of academic study they've indicated to us they might major in. And I'll give you all a moment to read Taylor's response. Now, it's not the fact that she's using kind of hot button words such as brutalization, misogynistic condemnation, or conservatism in her response that's appealing. I think the reason this was appealing to us as an admissions committee was the fact that you got a sense of her real curiosity about these areas. She was not using this space in the application to share with us any accolades. She's not telling us, she hopes to be this, and this is why she needs to study these things. There was a real sense of just academic and intellectual joy that came forward in her writing. And that kind of played into the rest of the application, as we'll kind of continue to read. So Raf, if we could take a look at the next slide as well. These are excerpts from a teacher recommendation and a counselor recommendation that were submitted as part of Taylor's application. And I'll also give you a moment to read through these as well. And again, with these excerpts from Taylor's application, instead of being kind of overwhelmed by how amazing she is, while these teacher recommendations are very warm, we wouldn't have called them superlative. Sometimes we'll read recommendations that say, Panatha is the single greatest student I've ever encountered in 30 plus years. Or the way in which Rick devours content in seminar is just beyond his years. He's destined to be a professor. These recs never kind of reached that level of what we would call strength, but they were so strong in a different way. I love the fact that the teacher recommendation gives you a really strong sense of how truly deep Taylor's passion for filmmaking is, right? And the literature and the text from this recommendation kind of is in concert with the idea that she also just deeply loves studying this film, right? So there's this narrative and this line that is created from Taylor's own writing and the support from a teacher. If you look at the counselor recommendation, the counselor calls Taylor a breath of fresh air, and the counselor also is very forthcoming in saying, she doesn't pick up all the ideas immediately, and sometimes she does need to ask for clarification, but that makes her such an ideal student. She's really willing to learn. She's really willing to ask for help, ask for clarification. So in the process of reading her file, you slowly come to just get this consistent picture of a young woman who is so curious about many things, but in particular, her interest in film. Next slide. And then finally, Taylor had the opportunity to interview with an alum interviewer in Hong Kong. And I think this was kind of the bow that wrapped it all together, in that it seemed like she was more interested with the interviewer in talking about things as opposed to bragging about accomplishments or expressing a need to pursue any particular vocation or career, right? And I love this last line. I can easily imagine her as a classmate that everyone would enjoy spending time with. We're admitting communities of students that hopefully will enjoy spending time with one another. And as impressive as a 36 ACT or a perfect 45 predicted might have been, admissions committees also really are impressed and warm to people who are fun to talk to, who, as the counselor referred to, are a breath of fresh air. Someone that an alum would enjoy spending time with, right? So although on the surface, Taylor's academic credentials, her dossier of extracurricular opportunities, or even the ways in which we kind of internally rated her teacher recommendations were not very, very overwhelmingly strong, for me as an area admissions officer and for the International Admissions Committee, she was such a wonderful take, and this was a very easy committee discussion because of how earnestly and how genuinely her narrative came across, right? And I think sometimes for students and community members, especially in areas of the world where there's a hyper focus on just the numbers, they may be sitting at home confused as to why Taylor was admitted, as opposed to other students from a similar background that may have had a perfect 45 perfect 36, and then taking a 7th IB class predicted at 7 in higher level, right? And it's not that those students aren't incredible in their own right. It's just we needed a Taylor. We really appreciated the genuine sense of curiosity that she was able to exhibit in her application. And we were confident that she could do the work, right? Were her academic credentials perfect? Absolutely not. But we're not looking for students that are going to just automatically come to campus and get straight A's. We're looking for students that will, yes, be able to handle the academic rigor on our campuses, but contribute as a community member, as an intellectual, as a member of extracurricular groups, and so on and so forth. So I remember as I was presenting this case to certain schools that requested case studies, and hopefully understanding that the best way to help your students is not to push them to kind of be perfect in any regard or all regards, but to use the resources around them as best they can to simply authentically and genuinely pursue their goals and their interests, because that will always be a student's best foot forward. You know, the admissions committee may have not felt particularly moved to admit Taylor in a different institution or in a different discussion, frankly. But her best foot forward was always going to be to really pursue her love of film and gender equality as best she could, knowing that the schools that will want that will respond to that application, right? So that is my case that I have to share. And I think we have maybe a little bit of time at the end to kind of just reflect on the cases that we heard today.
Yeah, thank you, John. And if I'll go ahead and throw out a few questions, but feel free if you guys have any questions for each other as well. We have about 6 or 7 minutes before people have to continue with their busy days. But Panatha, when you were giving your second example, you mentioned, or tell me if I interpreted this right, that student, you said you gave the impression that maybe in a different year or maybe in different circumstances she might not have been accepted, but in that year she was accepted. Am I right about that?
That is so common that there's somebody who is wonderful, who comes up for discussion, who's, and I think Eric brought this up as well, and John did as well. An application comes together, but the interest is so common that when we begin perceiving that it's kind of a generic application, it could hurt a student. But in another year, we might say, well, you know, this is good for representation, and there's enough good in there, depending on what the rest of the pool looks like, that we take the student. Yes, that's absolutely right. The decisions may not be the same. This may be partially dependent on what kinds of programs are new and available, on what our needs were. I remember one year Brown had a year of India, and a student like this would have been perceived as somebody who could contribute to helping bolster the whole community as it concentrated on India. There are a lot of factors, outside factors, that are outside everybody's control that might come into this. Sometimes parents and even schools will say, well, you know, what is it this year that's interesting? What instruments are you looking for? As if they could pick up that instrument in a few weeks and learn it perfectly. Or as if they could change their ethnicity, or if they could, as if they could change their interests. But that doesn't, that's, you should be who you are. And as Eric said, when you have an interest, you talk about that interest. You don't try to be somebody else, because it will fall flat.
So I'm right sometimes when I'm consoling my rejected students and saying luck is involved.
You are right in the sense that, absolutely, in the sense that not in the sense that's it's a lottery and we happen to pick this person instead of that person, but in the sense that in a given year, if we have a lot of the same kind of applicant, then the stakes are higher. So yes, you are absolutely right. There is that kind of luck.
Yeah.
Rob, the thing that I would add is it's often perceived as luck. by the student and the school. But what it really is a very thoughtful and nuanced discussion on our end. But the students and school communities are not privy to that discussion, nor can they control it. So I think one of the biggest missteps is students and school communities sometimes feel the need to try to control that by posturing a student's application one way or another. But the student's best foot forward is just to do them and then let our institutions kind of have the discussions as we will. Because regardless of how the discussions go, there's no telling in any given admission cycle or year what it is that we need or what we're looking for. So rather than try to cater to that, just staying true to who the student is.
Be who you are. And that gets back to one of the original ideas that we want the admissions process to be a growth experience for the student, that through the process they can understand themselves and learn how to communicate who they are to the outside world. And I was heartened by what you just said, and also by the idea when you said that it's a kind of, you're intellectually curious about these students, because sometimes you think about students pouring their hearts out into their application and you hope someone is appreciating it at the other end. You know, of course we don't know, but it is heartening to know that universities are caring about each student that makes the effort to apply. Yeah.
I kind of think you're not a good admission officer if you think that there is a right and a wrong and you don't feel badly about the people that you didn't take. There are really special kids out there. I think the best advice, to reiterate what John just said, if you express your honest opinions, you are going to write a better application than if you try to be somebody else in an effort to get in.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, kind of just going back to being yourself, I think that a lot of times, not only do students kind of, try to be right or wrong, or try to kind of, position themselves to get in, but they also try to be everything. And I think high school is one of the places in your life that will ask you to be good at everything and kind of prioritizes that. And I think that what you should be doing is really just kind of approaching the things that you're interested in and the things that you're passionate about. And that will actually come off to us in the application process as well. I can always tell when a student has a true passion for one specific area and they're applying to that specific program, much like a musical theater or something like that. Whereas a student who's just applied to the musical theater program just because they heard it was good and they wanted to be at Emerson and then they wanted to be in Boston. And so I always take solace, kind of what Panatha was saying, in that, it feels good to be like, you're not a great fit for musical theater. And I, as the admission officer, am aware of that. And I don't want to pigeonhole you in terms of your entire career and your entire academic experience in this very specialized program, when I can kind of tell that you're not that interested in the first place.
Yeah.
Raphael, one thing that we probably didn't tease out enough, and this is where doing something in person could be a little bit better, is sometimes you see, even in an essay, and I think one thing you were trying to get at, students write an essay and use and they put together an application, and in the process of doing so, they figure out more about themselves. There's a realization that, hey, I really like doing X. You probably see that process more than we do, but we often can sense it. And I think that if people can be convinced to approach this as a time of discovery and exploration, that there's a beauty in that as well. They're questioning themselves and figuring out who they are in a way that they might not have done so in the past.
Yeah, that's I think that's a great perspective, and I really appreciate everyone's. I've been taking notes myself, and I feel like listening to you talk, I have a lot of good reinforcement I can do of how students can work through the process, and regardless of the result, which they can't control, they can really learn a lot and improve themselves through the process. That's a nice ideal to put out there to counteract kind of the forces that put negative pressures on students. Yeah. Okay, so I think
I'm just going to add one more thing. People may think that this is just unique to the U.S. application process, but if you're in the social sciences, you are told to write about yourself in an effort to check your biases. So this is actually good practice for academic work.
Mm-hmm. All right, another good point to share with students, and yeah. So I think it's been a great session. We're a little bit past our 60-minute time limit, but I hope people watching will feel free to write some email comments during the conference when this session is shown, and we'll all be happy to respond and continue the conversation. So thank you again to all the panelists, and we'll go ahead and end our session here. And hopefully a year from now, we'll all be meeting in person again.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye,
Okay.
everyone.
Okay. Let's see. Oh. Okay.
Okay.
So,
thank you very much.
okay, yeah. Thanks for participating and great comments.
Thank you. All right. We'll talk soon.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.